everyone. Welcome to another episode of OsbornePro TV. My name is Rob, and today I'm going to be covering how to set up secure dynamic DNS updates in an environment. I feel there's two configurations, options that you can set this up in that are worthwhile, and I'm going to show, the value that comes from each one. Just as a side note, neither of these is foolproof or perfect, but it is just, something you can do to try to better harden things in your environment. So dynamic DNS update, that is when a DHCP server assigns an IP address to some kind of device on the network, and then the DNS records get automatically updated. So that, simplifies management, especially in networks that have a lot of clients, or maybe VPN clients being connected that have IP addresses that change often. This is a good way to keep those up to date. So first things first, I want to note, we'll start with this. So on the DNS server, if I go to Server Manager, Tools, DNS, it's going to open my DNS Manager. I have a forward lookup zone for the domain, and then a reverse lookup zone for a subnet. Now this subnet is one of my DHCP scopes that's configured here. This reverse lookup zone does not get configured by default. It has to be manually created. If it does not exist, the DHCP server is not going to be able to create these pointer records automatically. So you will need to create this manually, which is simple. Just right click, select new zone, define the subnet, and go through the prompts there, which is not what I'm covering in this video. So if we right click on the forward lookup zone here for OsbornePro.com, go to properties, you'll notice dynamic updates. I have this set to secure only. This, for both of these configurations, is how you should be setting this up. What this does is tells the DNS records that they cannot be updated unless an authenticated domain user is performing these updates. If you have non-secure and secure or none, you're allowing people that are not domain joined to modify these. But what if you don't have devices that are domain joined? You want those to still update? I'm going to show you how to use the secure only option for those situations, right? And the way to do that is the DHCP server registers the pointer records and the A records on behalf of the clients. By default, the DHCP server will only register the pointer record. So we're basically adding a thing here. And to do that, so we have this set to secure only, we click OK. Now we go to our DHCP server, and there's two areas to modify. There's one for global settings and one on the individual scopes. So for global, right click on IPv4, go to properties, go to DNS, and the first way I'm going to show you is with named protection. So with named protection, what this does is prevents the bad guy from being able to modify any A records in DNS. So for example, if I were to create an A record here like this one, an attacker is not going to be able to take my name, set their IP address manually, and then poison the DNS cache by using the same IP address. Things are still going to go to my defined A record, right? So they can't modify that. The downside is for Windows devices that are not domain joined, you need to add these A records manually. If a device is not a Windows device, the DNS records here can still be updated dynamically, and the DHCP server is able to, add those, or make those modifications on its own. And again, if the A record exists, the DHCP server is not going to overwrite it. So with our configuration here, we enabled DNS dynamic updates. These values are all set to, those all get set by this button here. So when we enable enable name protection, these are the three settings that come along with it, right? Another thing here is if we go to the Advanced tab and click Credentials, this is where we'd enter a dynamic DNS username. And what this is allows the DHCP server to change A records and pointer records on the DNS server using this user account. This user account has no special permissions, and I'll show you that here in Active Directory. We have the users, dynamic DNS, member of, just domain users, and that's it. That's all you need there. Set an extremely long password that never expires so that you can kind of just leave things as is. And the benefit of using a user instead of the DHCP server is if you have multiple DHCP servers for failover, they're both going to use the same account, which allows them both to modify each other's records and keep things up to date and prevent errors and assignments from happening. So that is one thing that needs to be created with the dynamic DNS user, and we set the credentials here on the each DHCP server individually. And the other thing we need to do to give the DHCP server permissions to modify DNS records is in the Active Directory users container, we find the DNSUpdateProxy Group, and we add only our DHCP server computers. Basically, a DHCP computer object should be the only members of this group. You do not add the dynamic DNS user here, just the servers. So another thing to mention is if you're not following best practices and your DHCP server is on the same server as Active Directory and DNS, you want to use this command to apply principles of least privilege and not give too many permissions to the DNS service. Okay, so on Active Directory we have added our DHCP server to the DNSUpdateProxy Group. We have created a general purpose user called Dynamic DNS with a password that never expires, that they can't change, that is very long, and they're not going to be, an attacker's not going to be able to crack. And then on our DHCP server we have set the credentials globally, and on our DNS values we have enabled DNS dynamic updates according to the settings below and enable name protection. So with name protection configured on the Windows server that is not domain joined, we need to add a DNS suffix for the domain that the record should be registered with, which is OsbornePro.com. And we need to tick the box here to register this connection's addresses in DNS and use this connection's DNS suffix and DNS registration. And what that does is, just to demonstrate it here, if I go to my leases, do I have anything here? Okay, no leases right now. And do I have anything in my DNS records? I have no pointer and I have no A record. So I'm going to restart this server. Just to throw it out there, there's a couple of ways to renew a DHCP lease. Either change the host name, restart the computer, restart the DHCP client service, and I think there's one more way, but I don't remember it offhand. And you can, oh that's right, you can manually do it with ipconfig/register DNS. So now that I've restarted my web server, we can see that the lease was created here, and if I go to my DNS we can see a reverse lookup zone was created. And then if we check my forward lookup, no, don't delete that. If we check the forward lookup zone, we can see, because it's a Windows server that is not domain joined, the A record was not created. However, if I come to a Linux machine here, and I do the same thing right now, my host name, I kind of stole the host name, so we're going to use this as an example. So if I come over here, well first let's do this for the example, echo Cali hostname. Alright, now we're going to do dhclient-release and then dhclient to register the address. Check my DHCP server. Now I can see Cali was assigned an IP address, and if I come over here I can see an A record was created successfully for it. If I check my reverse lookup zones, we can see there's two values here. So web servers 103, I'm going to create an A record to demonstrate the name protection. So web server 192.168.137.103. With these two configurations I'm going to show you, this tick box here, I have not seen it have much of an effect with changing anything. I've been leaving it unchecked because I don't want that modification to happen because it's giving too many permissions out. However, it is helpful to leave create associated pointer record check. So I click add host. This creates my record in my A record here. So now I have one for web server, which should be referencing this server, right? So now on my Kali machine, if I change this to web server and I check my host name, now I have that server. I can do DH client, release, and then register the DHCP address again. Now if I check my leases, I can see it changed the host name. If I check the pointer records, I can see a new pointer record was added. If I check the A records, I can see that it did not modify the value that I had set manually. So that's the protection that name protection gives us. If we change our configuration up, we would start with our client, go to Network and Sharing Center, select the adapter, Properties, TCP IP v4, Advanced, DNS. We untick these boxes and we can delete the DNS suffix value. And this is the reason we're doing this is it saves unnecessary traffic. It's not going to hurt anything if you keep it here. However, we're telling this client don't attempt to register A records because the DHCP server is going to always take care of that. So we hit OK, we hit OK, and now those settings are set on this client. If I go back to my DHCP server, we're going to configure scope and global the same here just to not confuse anybody. We'll go untick the box for enable name protection. Leave always dynamically update DNS records, and then that's going to tell the DHCP server always update A and pointer records on behalf of the client. Discard A and pointer records when lease is deleted. That means if a lease is removed from the DHCP leases table, the pointer record and A record also get deleted if the DHCP server created those records. And then this next one here is just for legacy clients. Chances are you won't need it. However, I add it every time just in case there's something that requires the help. So we're going to apply those settings, and I'm going to set the same thing globally. Apply, always configure, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. So now our DHCP server is set in that manner. I'm going to now delete this 103 lease. I'm going to come over here and refresh just to see if, 103 was removed. Because I created this one, I believe it should still be there, so I'm going to delete it. All right, and now if I come back here just to show it the difference, right? If I do client R and then D to release, then re-register. If I do leases here, I can see that was reassigned. It's updated the reverse record, and also it creates the web server record here. So I'm going to show the logging that gets offered. It's not so much protection as logging and giving you the ability to see that something malicious was performed in your DHCP logs, right? So all that's configured. I'm going to restart this device here to re-register the DHCP and DNS records. And as soon as that comes back up, I'm going to log in again just in case we need to make any kind of modifications. And here, let's see if we got our lease yet. Nope, not just yet. Alright, so we'll sign in. And now we can see, web server was created here. A pointer address was created, and also now this time the A record is going to be created automatically. Now notice we had two records in there. One was for Cali, which was which is currently named webserver.osbornepro.com with a 132 address, and we just overwrote that record here. So these two clients are going to be competing for this value. So if I come back to my attack machine and I do DH client, I just registered again, and it will overwrite my A record here. So that's what that name protection was preventing from happening before. Okay, so that's that part. Now what we want to do is we're going to do this. So I shouldn't have done that so early. I want this to be my winning record here, so I actually have to restart one more time. Sorry about that, guys. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to delete that 132 address. We're going to delete this 132 address here. I probably should have just refreshed. Yeah. Alright, so the next thing, my host name is still web server, so if I come up to my connections, we're going to edit this to have the exact same IP address as the web server. Alright, so let's get signed back in here. Check my DHCP leases, and we can see it's got a 103 address. So I set my Cali machine to have a 103 address. I save, close that out, and should systemctl restart network manager and IPA, and we can see now I got that 103 address here. And refresh this. Now this is statically set. So when the next time the client goes to register its DHCP and DNS records, it's going to create a bad record value because the 103 address is already taken. So let's see. I might have had to delete it, but we'll find out for sure here. There we go. So now we can see that a bad address was returned. So the next one in line is going to be assigned. And this bad address is the extent of the protection we're getting here. So you can see something malicious possibly happened, and you can look into, you know, what the situation is or what's going on, right? So you'd have to go through your DHCP logs and your DNS logs for those issues. And those are logged to a file. So you can kind of see where they're at. If I go to the global settings here again, properties, advanced, this is the log file path for DHCP. Another thing I want to bring up here is conflict detection attempts. I have this value set to 1, and that was a ping that was sent to make sure that 103 address was not used up already. And that's what gave us this bad address value. If this is set to 0, the check is not performed and you're not going to get this. So this is a required setting for this to work. And those are the two ways of configuring dynamic DNS that have any worth. So this way is personally my favorite because it requires the least amount of management. You know, you just got to kind of check logs as opposed to adding records on your own, especially for non-domained machines. You want to get as many records updated as possible. However, if you have a DHCP scope that doesn't have a lot of, that is not going to have any undomain joined machines that are Windows, it's nice to have that name protection on there to kind of prevent attackers from being able to poison that A record. So that is all I had to cover. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, or feel free to let me know what you thought about the video or any kinds of ideas. And it always helps me out if you can subscribe as well or like the video. So thanks everybody for watching.